let's see, Jerry Cheevers was the goalie, and they had a couple of other colorful hockey players, and they were a pretty competitive team. Made the playoffs all 3 years that I was there, and then, of course, they went into the National Hockey League for a couple of years, and it didn't make it, and they had to merge with the Minnesota North Stars. But for many, many years, when that was an American Hockey League town and a WHA town, it did very well. And unfortunately, a couple of reasons led to the downfall of professional hockey in that city. I think the foremost reason was the arena being way out where people couldn't get to it, and number two was the fact that when they entered the National Hockey League, they were not a winning franchise. So it just kind of fizzled out and went by the boards. But those were fun years back in the early 70s with the WHA in Cleveland.
That was a fun league. I remember the New York Raiders. They were in that league, too. They had the Los Angeles Sharks. There's some good players that switched leagues. I know Bernie Perrant for a while played in that league, didn't he?
Eric Sanderson, a fellow named Wayne Gretzky.
That's right, with the Indianapolis Racers, I think. When he was 17 years old, didn't he come up with them?
That's correct, yeah. And when I was doing the games, when we go up to Winnipeg, their top line was Bobby Hull, Anders Hedberg, and Ulf Nielsen, and they could really skate. I mean, they could fly, and that was a lot of fun. And those were great memories, the memories of the Klondike Ice Palace in Edmonton before the Northlands Coliseum, when you could only see half the ice broadcasting the radio. You had to peer around a pole on the left side to see the left side of the ice. It was an experience and another character-building process. It seems like I have those a lot.
But you did the Mets for a while?
Yeah, with the Nets right now, with Cleveland.
The New York Mets.
Right, I was there during the not-so-glory years, 79, 80, and 81, and they really, really had problems when 6,000 people would come out just to boo them. And it was a very, very difficult time during sports time in the city of New York. They just didn't know what was going on, and it was tough. It was tough broadcasting those games.
But I think if you're going to be anywhere in the business, it'd be better to be broadcasting a losing team in New York. It's just such a great city, so much going on. And covering it on Channel 9, what's it like having both New York baseball teams in first place as a sportscaster?
Well, it's exciting, covering the ball clubs. Interestingly enough, Doug, I was listening to one of the local sports call-in shows this morning, and as you know, the Mets, after winning something like 7 in a row, have just lost their last 2, and had a problem yesterday. They were shut out by San Diego. Sid Fernandez pitched a good game, but they only got about 3 or 4 hits, the Mets, and it was an anemic attack. But by the same token, fans are calling in. They're all over him already. They're all over Davey Johnson. They're all over the Mets hitting. They're trying to figure out what's wrong with the Mets, and they're still in first place by 3.5, 4 games, whatever. And they've won 7 of their last 9. And they're already beginning to push the panic button. So it shows you how seriously they take that ball club. And,
Steve, we have to take a break at the bottom of the hour. If I could hold you over for one more segment, we'll get right back to you. Okay, we got to take a break for news headlines, and we'll be back after these messages. You're listening to Sports Beat on the Sun Radio Network. And right now we're talking to Steve Albert, sportscaster at Sports Channel, does the Nets games, and WWOR-TV, Channel 9, seen on many cable stations around the country. Steve, sorry we had to interrupt you there. We had to do news at the bottom of the hour, but maybe you can relay some of the memories you had of the Mets when you had to do their games a few years ago.
Well,
any positives you can recall out of that?
Let me see. There really weren't that many. As I said earlier, those were the tough years. As far as the Mets were concerned, and let me see if I can even name the ball club from back then.
I guess Kingman was probably the big star at that time, wasn't he?
Who's that? I'm sorry?
Dave Kingman.
Yeah, he was there for a while.
Did you find him a tough interview? I know there's been stories, of course, the putting the rat in the shoebox for the woman sports writer a few years ago. Was he a tough interview?
He had his moments. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
He was hot and cold. It depends what kind of mood he was in. But I really never had a major problem with him. It was a strange time. I remember one of the most memorable things was the case of Lee Mazzilli, who was a homegrown kid, Brooklyn, New York, and they put a lot of pressure on the young man to to do well quickly. And he did fairly well. He got into a bad slump, and the fans were all over him, and he eventually got traded. Now he comes back a conquering hero, integral part of the situation back in '86 as a pinch hitter. And he finally, as they say in the sports biz, played within himself. He realized his limitations and was able to be a tremendous role player and contributed to the ball club. And they were in such a tight-wound, stressful situation back in the late 70s, early 80s that they were trying to put all the pressure on this young man. And I think that was indicative of the times as far as the Mets were concerned. I mean, they thought that people like Craig Swan and Pat Zachary were going to lead them to the promised land, and it just wasn't there. You need people like Dwight Gooden and Ron Darling and Sid Fernandez. Those are people that are going to lead you to the promised land. You know, taking nothing away from the Zacharys and the Swans, they were decent pitchers, but not the type of pitchers, unless you're surrounded by other people, that are going to do a championship number. So it was a very, very difficult time. And the thing I really remember are the empty seats at Shea Stadium. And the lean years were tough, very tough. And it's nice to see that things have turned around.
You mentioned Lee Mazzilli being a Brooklyn-born product. You yourself grew up in New York. It's got to be a big kick for you just to be able to cover sports and teams that you grew up watching and rooting for as a kid.
Yeah, it really is, because I was a ball boy for the Knicks back in the 60s, and I went to Kent State University in Ohio, and when they had the shootings there in 1970, May 4th, it was the year that the Knicks were involved in the championship round with the Lakers, when they eventually went on to win the championship. And during the shootings, they evacuated the campus, and I had to go home. I was a sophomore, and Danny Whalen, who was then the trainer of the Knicks, called me up and asked me if I'd like to sit on the bench and be an honorary ball boy, being the oldest ball boy in the NBA at that time, probably at about 19 years old. And I couldn't pass it up. So for the final game, the night that Willis Reed hobbled out onto the floor and they went on to win, I happened to be on the bench. It was one of the great thrills of my life, and that's part of growing up in New York. And, of course, when he ironically later became the coach of the Nets this year, we talked about that endlessly. We had a lot of fun with that. And, it all seems to come around together. There's so many ironies in sports, and it's such a fraternity, and there's so much camaraderie. And that's part of growing up in New York and being part of the sports scene, I guess.
That's great. Well, Steve, thanks for joining us today, spending a few minutes with us, and always enjoyed your work. I come from the Long Island area, and it's great to have you on the show today.
My pleasure, Doug. Good luck to you.
Thanks a lot. Steve Albert from New Jersey, and one of the best in the business, play-by-play and studio work. Right now, let's get back to one of the great defensive NHL players in the history of hockey, and also played on the Stanley Cup winning team in 1968 for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Currently hosts a hockey talk program up in New York on that all-sports radio station WFAN. Pete Stemkowski. Let's get back to that interview right now.
Let's talk about the Devils a little more. You're in the New York area. You've had more chance to see that team. Did it surprise you? I mean, you've covered hockey many years. Did you expect them to be that good this quick?
No. I think they surprised everybody. You certainly realized that they couldn't go much farther down. When you hit rock bottom, there's nowhere to go, and the only way to go is up. And I think that some people were wondering, okay, we have young people, okay, we've gone through the growing pains, okay, we've suffered, and then after the success doesn't come, you have to start looking, well, okay, maybe they were young, and maybe, yes, we were going to have a lot of lack of success here, but maybe these aren't the right people. Just because they're young doesn't mean, they got a whole lot of talent. They could keep making the same mistakes and never benefit from it. But, the fact that they got in and in an awfully tough Patrick division, I mean, we've got teams like Pittsburgh and the New York Rangers that were over 80 points in overall during the 80 games, and they didn't make the playoffs. So you knew it was going to be a chore. You almost conceded the Islanders, Philadelphia, and Washington to get in, but there was going to be a real battle for those other playoff positions. So for the Devils to make the great strides that they did in winning the Patrick division and winning 2 rounds in the playoffs, I think it's tremendous. I never nearly expected that. I would have been surprised, and I was surprised that they even made the playoffs, nonetheless going as far as they did in postseason play.
I know the coaching change came as a surprise to me, especially when they made it. I guess it was, early March or late February, whenever they did.
Yeah.
That is not something you usually do right then, but it seemed to work for them. They turned it right around, and they won those key games at the end of the season, as you mentioned, to make the playoffs.
Well, it's not it's not easy to coaching a group of 20 individuals. Everybody's got a different personality. Some have to be pushed a little extra. Some have to be stroked once in a while. And Doug Carpenter, it was like a marriage that had gone on so long and had so many problems and had gone to so many therapists. And you think that hey, it's going to work out. That it just got to the point where Carpenter had tried everything. He had a basic approach to the game. He had a personality that was Doug Carpenter, and it came to the point where he benched certain people. He was not the kind that would say, "Okay, we lost, but we'll regroup and we'll get them next time." If you made a mistake, John McLean was a perfect example. Was sitting him on the bench, wasn't playing him much, and it was like a breath of fresh air. In came Jim Schoenfield, and people were wondering, well, who is this guy? He coached very briefly in the National Hockey League, had a tremendous career as a player, but did not have a whole lot of experience coaching in the National Hockey League level. And what would he do? But it seems like his personality and those of the teams, and the team just needed something to pick him up at that particular time. And he brought McLean along, played him a lot. Lozelle started to play a little bit more. And, not only did those people come through, but I think you have to look at the point that when you're going to get success, especially on this level, you're going to have good goalkeeping. So, when Burt came in the Olympics, here's a team that was floundering and looking for the playoffs, not using their key guys. Chevrier went on the bench, and you bring a guy in from the Olympics and say, here, you're number one, you're our goalkeeper. So, not only Schoenfield deserves a lot of credit, but I think you're going to have to look at that goalkeeping situation, and he was just tremendous down the stretch. Schoenberg certainly made a big difference in the performance of the Devils this year.
What teams do you see on the horizon, if any, that could possibly really make a good run at the Oilers next year?
Well, I don't know how many people looked at the beginning and thought that Calgary would win that Smythe division. It was going to be their year. They had a new coach in Terry Crisp. There would have to be some adjustments there. Overall, during the 80 games, they were number one as far as total points are concerned. So throughout the second round of their playoffs, when they were swept by the Oilers, they had a pretty decent season. And I still think they're going to be the main foe for the Oilers. I think that when Edmonton looks at getting anywhere and winning everything, and much like in the Patrick division, it's the hardest chore really is getting out of your own particular division. And Edmonton had a great year with Nieuwendyk. Whether as a rookie come back and do as well in the second year, that'll remain to be seen. But they made some key trades with St. Louis down the stretch. They've shored up their defense. I look at their defense, and it's good. They got some decent defensemen with experience down there. And you're wondering what's going to happen with the Montreal Canadiens. It's always a franchise that always strives for victory. It's a tradition of that. They've got a new coach, and who they're going to put in there, as their new coach, that remains to be seen. But in the East here, I don't know. The Rangers, are they going to be able to, all these new faces, put it all together? How about the Islanders? Are they going to strive and improve? Potvin's gone. Pittsburgh has Tony Esposito running the show. So, if anything else, Doug, I think it's going to be an interesting off-season with namings of general managers in Minnesota and coaching changes and the draft, of course, coming up next year. So the National Hockey League certainly will not be quiet in the off-season. Definitely
A league in transition. Pete, you've been to the broadcasting business for the past few years. How did you go from the ice into the booth?
Well, it was a strange situation. When I retired, I took a few courses, learned the basics of deliveries and things like that, and I was very fortunate that Marv Albert, sportscaster here, and you probably see him nationally on NBC, did a piece on me, and I asked him about getting on with ESPN during their games a number of years ago, and he put me through to the right people there, and things fell into place, and I did their games with ESPN for a couple of years, and then went to Connecticut, did a little morning disc jockey work, a little sports here on Long Island, and now I'm working for a radio station in Queens, a 24-hour radio station that does the Met games, WFAN. So in the 10 years I've been retired, it's been the broadcasting. That's been the bread and butter for me the last several years.
And you just completed another successful season hosting Hockey Talk on that station. And future plans, what would you like to get into? More TV or more play-by-play or what?
We're looking at something that's just in the growing stages, so maybe a National Hockey league radio situation that's not, it's about, they're thinking about it. I've been contacted by some people in that area, and maybe doing a little bit something with the Rangers next year, some post or pregame shows. So if it's hockey, I'm going to be close to it. It's my number one thing. I've been involved with it since I've been 7 years old, so we're talking well over 30 years. So it's what I like. It's what I know about the most, and certainly in this area, living on Long Island, we've got the Islanders, we've got the Rangers, we've got the Flyers only 100 miles away, Hartford Whalers. So in this immediate area, there's certainly plenty to talk about with all those teams in this area.
Well, that's great. Pete, thanks for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and we'll do it again soon.
Doug, thank you for calling.
Pete Stemkowski, great to talk with him, and we'll be having him on again as the next NHL season rolls around, as they seem to roll around quickly as seasons overlap into each other, and the hockey season seems to get longer and longer, as does the basketball season. And speaking of basketball, we'll be talking NBA playoffs with Josh Coswin after we take this break.